Hey, I'm Dean and this is Legacy Voyage. In Season 1, I'm documenting my journey to earning my first 100K net worth as a full-time college student. Join me as I share some of the lessons I learned along the way.
A guest speaker came in the other day and was telling us this story where at the very end, the person who was interviewing this woman asked her, "What color is your underwear?" It was an insane story, but more insane, or like, I guess the bigger takeaway from me from the story is what she said, and I'll share that at the end. But to give some background, this is a very accomplished woman, tons of experience, tons of work experience. She's doing big things. One of the opportunities that opens up to her is to serve as one of the board of directors of this really massive company. She didn't mention what the company was. I honestly don't know what it was or if it was that massive, but it's a big company, and this was kind of like her dream role. It was the role that she's always wanted, to serve on a really big board for a really big company and have a say in what it does. And so this opportunity opens up. She puts in her application. She goes through the first round, second round, third. She goes through all these rounds, and then it eventually gets to, I believe she said she was 6 months in. 6 months into this interview process. And as she was in it, she's meeting with each of the board of directors, and the very last interview came down to her and one other person. And as the very last round, she spoke with the chairman, or like the head of the board of directors. And it was that final round. And she was studying a bunch. She did the interview, and from what she told us, she crushed it. She did super, super well and got all the questions right. At the very end, the man talks to her. He says, you did very well. You answered all of these questions, honestly, better than I could have, or better than anyone else could have. So great job, great job. But one final question for you. I've been wondering this whole time, what color is your underwear? That's what he asked. And of course, this woman, she takes a step back. She's like, what did this guy just say to me? And to be honest, like, absolutely, it's an outrageous question that this man should be asking. So any other person, like literally any other person in the world, would probably start screaming and yelling and like call the cops, like do all these different things. But when she was telling us the story, she had a long pause. She looked at everyone in the room and she was like, this is the big lesson. And she looked at us, she said, in these types of situations, never lose control. Because when you lose control, you lose all of the power. And so she did something that was so contrary to what literally any other person would do in that situation. She says, take a step back. She pauses for a second. She, that's weird, because I was wondering, what color's your underwear? Like that's what her response was. And then the guy starts laughing and then keeps going on. And then at the very end, they both stand up, shake each other's hand. Then the guy looks her dead in the eyes and he asks again, or he pushes it further. He says, it's hot pink thong, right? And it was at that point, I was like, what the heck? And she still like stayed true to that principle of not losing control. She got up, walked away, resigned from that, her running in the position, told the board, said like, the chairman asked me a very inappropriate question, which is why I'm stepping out from this. And I don't, that level of self-control that she has to have to hold herself together, not like completely go blind and outrageous, but to hold this type of self-control, I thought that was extremely respectable, especially as the position that she was put in. I thought that was insane. And it reminded me of a story that my dad taught me ages ago, but it's the idea that never get angry, never lose control from what someone else does. And he told me this analogy: if you're ever driving in a highway and someone cuts you off, the minute you get angry, the other person is in control. Because you're getting angry at what they did. Because the only thing you truly can control is your reaction to all of these experiences. And he reiterated this same lesson, the same concept, which says, control the controllables. And that's what I've been kind of reading up on. This past weekend, we had this Yosemite trip. So it was like a 4-hour drive, drove there, drove back. And along the way, I was rereading this book, Meditations. It's a Stoicism book. But the whole premise of Stoicism, or at least the big takeaway that I agree with, is this idea that we can only control the controls. And we should really spend all our time, most of our time, and focus and energy on what we can control. So that was the big thing. And speaking on this types of Stoicism, there was something else that this lady who came in to speak, this is something else that she shared with us. And it was, she emphasized some of her really big values, some of her mantras kind of, and she sprinkled it in throughout the entire talk. And as she was doing that, it really made me take a step back and ask myself, what is my mantra Like, what are my guiding principles? What are my values that I want to live by? And so I spent some time really thinking on this. It honestly wasn't too difficult to think about it because I've been thinking about it for ages. I just haven't had time to like consolidate it into one spot. But these are my 5 guiding principles in life. The first one is my dream self. And this actually, before I continue, this goes into doubles of the week. These are 2 dubs and 2 L's I took for the week. My first dub was really thinking hard on this. Like, what are my mantras and my guiding principles? But to run through those guiding principles, my first one is my dream self. Imagine the person that you want to become years from now on your deathbed. What kind of habits and attributes and characteristics and all these different things that that person embodies? Who is that person? And I think honestly, my whole life is about pursuing that person, because even though I will never get to that point, I think a lot of fulfillment comes in pursuit of trying to become that dream self. And for me, there are these exemplars that we base our dream self, or that I base my dream self after. And the number one exemplar, of course, is Jesus Christ. And so I think that pursuit of who I want to become, and always coming back to this question of what would he do? What would Jesus do in a situation if I'm, I don't know, driving to work or going for a walk or eating, I don't know, like random things like that. What would he do has been one of the biggest guiding principles, honestly. And you'll see that all of these 5 guiding principles, they all kind of intertwine, but I think this is like the pinnacle of all of it that guides really everything of all these guiding principles. The second thing I would say that's super big for me is pragmatism. Like, what is the cash value? When I evaluate different beliefs, actions, habits, even people that I have in my life, I run them through this filter of pragmatism. What is the cash value? And not necessarily cash value like, oh, what's the ROI? How much money can I get from that person? But more so, what is the value that this person brings into my life that will help me in pursuing my dream self and pursuing the person that I want to become? Because if they do not help me toward that person, and there is no chance that they will help me toward that person, then they are pulling me away from my dream self. And I'm sorry, but I just don't want that in my life. The next thing is a growth mindset. And I have learned that this is super, super big for me. And a part of this growth mindset is this fail forward mentality. It's like, I'm not afraid of failure. Because when you think about it, when you consider success and you consider failure, if you spend your whole life always trying to minimize your losses, then you won't take those big shots that honestly are probably likely to fail. But in so doing, it's like having this stepping stone towards success. And so I view failure as this learning lesson that I'm not afraid to do. And I think this growth mindset is a huge part of that. I think one of the conversations I had this past weekend was with someone who kind of, she was like so down on herself and beat herself up for the fact that she was not good at math. And the way she said it was like, oh, no, I could never do math. I would never want to do math. She was so afraid of it. What I told her was like, that's a fixed mindset, bro. Like, if you commit yourself, and this is how I really consider a lot of things, but if I commit myself for a month to learn a new skill, to do a new thing, I think I will be able to do it. If I commit to myself that I want to learn rocket science, I can do it. If I commit to myself that I want to run a marathon or triathlon, I will do it. And it's that mentality that I think the growth mindset really advocates for. And that's what I am a huge fan of, is this growth mindset. The fourth thing that I always come back to is this idea of nuance. Nuance, I went through like a season of nuance where I kept realizing how big nuance is and how important it is, really, because there was a time, and I probably am like this even to this day, but there was a time where I was always jumping to the extremes. I think as people, we naturally gravitate toward the extremes. You look at all the news headlines, it's all the extremes, like this side versus that side. But what I found is that for basically anything in life, there is always this nuance that needs to be deciphered. And for me, it always comes back to what I call, my framework called the golden median. And I think I talked about this in the last episode, but it's taken from Socrates or Aristotle. I always get confused between the two. I think it was Aristotle. I think it's taken from Aristotle's idea of the golden mean. And the golden mean is basically, don't go too far in one direction or the other. Like, you take courage, for example. Courage is usually this good thing. If you don't have enough courage, then you're a coward. But if you have too much courage, then you just get reckless and you start doing things that you have no business getting involved in. And it's taking that same type of principle, like finding the nuance, finding the balance, but pushing it further and saying, okay, in a lot of situations, there are usually two virtues involved. And these virtues usually seem to be opposing in some ways, but the key is finding the balance, because when one virtue is pushed to the extreme, that's when it becomes a vice. And I think I was talking about this and thinking about it more in terms of, you think about like the extremely woke people and then like the Andrew Tates of the world. Those are like two extremely polar opposites. Like those two in my head, they seem like vices, like push to the extreme, that's where you get to. But in both viewpoints, there's like a kernel of truth that each of them push to the extreme. Like these woke people are all about like supporting people and really understanding people, and all about empathy and emotions, which to an extent, of course, I agree with. Like you shouldn't just outrightly dismiss people's emotions, because that's kind of cruel, you know? But then on the other side, there's also this point of stop feeling bad for yourself and pick yourself up, and it's time to get to work, which is kind of like what Andrew Tate talks about, but then he takes it to the extreme and is like super outrageous with a lot of his statements. But I think like the same principles apply, where there's this kernel of truth, honestly, in most things, but usually it gets taken way too far into the vices or into the extremes, which is why I think this is super important, this golden median idea. And then the final guiding principle that guides my life, and I was talking about this earlier, is stoicism. I focus on what is within my control the controllables, because it's not that I can directly impact how other people treat me. What I can do is control the way I react to those and the way I hold myself up. And I think the fail forward mentality is all about this too. Like if I go through a failure, no amount of like feeling sad or crying is going to change the fact that I failed. The only thing that I can do is learn from it and make sure that it doesn't happen again, or at least to the best of my ability that it doesn't happen again. So those are my 5 guiding principles. And then the other thing that I was thinking about as I was writing these out were 5 pieces of advice that I disagree with. 5 common pieces of advice that I just do not believe in. I think each of these will probably take some time to explain, but to run through them, 4 pieces of advice, but to run through them, the first one is, life is about being happy. I think I hear this all the time, like, the point of life is about being happy. And I just straight up disagree. Like, in my view, and of course it depends on how you define happiness, but I think the way most people define happiness is this hit of dopamine. Like, oh, I'll be happy if I get X. And X could be $100,000, X could be this trip or the vacation, it could be anything. But from what I've seen and from what I've experienced personally, happiness is fleeting. And what I think is more important than happiness is fulfillment. Like, happiness is straight up overrated in my eyes, because everyone's like, oh, we should always go for happiness. What if happiness is like brings you things? What if I get happy off of like doing drugs or doing something that is literally killing me? Like that, in that case, happiness just doesn't seem it. But what I think is even better than that is fulfillment. And for a reminder, I think fulfillment is about pursuing the person that I want to become. And for me, that's trying to become more like my dream identity, my dream self, which is Jesus. Another piece of advice that I think gets thrown a lot, especially in college where people have no idea what they're going to do, is follow your passion. And the reason I disagree with this is because I think at our age, most people, first of all, don't know what their passion is. And if they do know what their passion is, it's not something that's gonna lead to any good outcomes. My passion is like watching anime all day. Kind of like the follow Be Happy example. Like if my passion is drinking beer, then that's not really gonna lead to anything good in life, I don't think. And so I think this is like a really overstated thing that I don't agree with. I think the better advice, and it is taken directly out of Cal Newport's book called So Good They Can't Ignore You, or something along those lines. But it basically talks about how don't follow your passion, build your passion. Go pick something, become great at that thing, and as you become great, and then the process and the journey of doing that thing, you will develop this passion for and this love for doing the thing. Another thing I disagree with is how a lot of people say don't be selfish. I think I grow up, and in society we get told this all the time. Don't be selfish, always be selfless, always be thinking of others. But I disagree with this. I think there's a lot of value in going back to this golden mean idea. There's a lot of value in balancing being selfish with being selfless. And ages ago, I talked about this selfish, selfless paradox. But I think in order for me to serve and love and care for my people the best way I can, is I need to make sure that I'm good. I need to make sure that my health is in order. I need to make sure that I am good so that I can care for the ones that I love. And I think when people say, oh, you shouldn't be selfish, I think it's wrong. Like, in some cases, it is actually good to be selfish. And the way they phrase it in this thing called objectivism is to be self-interested. I think that's actually a good thing. But of course, taken to the extreme is like you're being extremely selfish, and yeah, and that's where things get dicey. And then the final thing, common piece of advice, or not advice, but common saying that I disagree with is like money is the root of all evil. I think as someone who is, I probably define myself as a capitalist, even though that's probably has a lot of like baggage with it. I haven't dove in too deep into like the economics of this or philosophy of it, but I will say money talks. Like money is powerful, and I think being able to get money, you have a lot of power with it, and with that power, you can do a lot of things. And one of those things could be evil for sure, but it could also be a lot of good things. And that's what I believe is like money is not necessarily the root of all evil, because it can be used for some really good things. I think like the desire of money, or the mere desire of money, is what the really bad thing is actually. But those are some things that I've been thinking about in terms of like my guiding principles, my values, my hot takes, so to say. The other dub for the week is I've been really diving into becoming technical. Like I've been going through a bunch of these YouTubes trying to build apps in React or Next.js and Vercel, all these different app building things. And it's been really cool. I think, like I mentioned with the growth mindset thing, if I commit myself to doing something for 1 month, I can do it. Like if I commit myself to learning a language, I can do it. If I commit myself to, by the end of this month, I will be able to build apps, I will be able to do it. And so that's what I'm going through right now. On the grind set for building apps, and it's been honestly super fun to get the technical kickback, because there's always like, even back when I came in as a CS major, there's this feeling of fulfillment. I think this feeling of like, or after I'm working on this project for hours and I realize it's past like 10 p.m. and hey, I gotta go to sleep. But I think that part is really cool, to like build something, have an idea, and then turn it into reality. I think is really awesome. For the L's of the week, I think probably the biggest L is that I've been, oh my goodness, I've been wasting a lot of time. And I realized this pretty recently, because over the past couple days have been when I've really been leaning into this whole becoming technical thing. But I was on a call the other day with a guy who, and he's like super busy. He was asking me, he's like, oh, so what do you do most of the time? And I was like, oh yeah, I do this and that. But when I was really thinking about it, like, okay, with school barely takes up any time. I barely put any effort into that. Like that's very minimal. The stuff I'm doing with the venture firm, also fairly minimal, like not more than 5 hours for sure. The stuff I'm doing with We Are Nesian, my own startup, like that's less than zero. That's nothing, bro. And the stuff I'm doing with the Roundabout, the YC startup, it's like extremely minimal as well. And so I was really thinking about it. I was like, where's all my time going? I mean, a ton of it, of course, not even a ton of it. Like, so some of it is going towards like personal stuff, like working out. Some of it is going towards hanging out and doing whatever. But real talk, a lot of it is just going to waste time stuff, like watching anime and binging, bro. Like, it's not even binging on whatever, like eating whole containers of cookie dough. Like that has been the thing. And it's weird because I think one of the things that keeps bringing me back to like keep on eating cookie dough, even though, and honestly, it's not even good, bro. Like, I think I've had it so much that I'm just over it at this point. But it's just become like this weird habit that I kept coming back to. But I think the reason I keep coming back to it is because like when I look at myself in the mirror, like I'm not sad about it. Like when I look at my biceps and things like that, is like, okay, if I can be binging on cookie dough and I can still look like that, I'm fine with it. But then I was thinking about it even more. Imagine if I didn't eat cookie dough. Like, then I would just be completely jacked, bro. And so I think that's like the realization I had recently, where I'm like, imagine if I like just didn't eat cookie dough for like a month or two, and just the progress that I would make in that time, oh my goodness, it would be insane. And so I think having that realization, but also the realization that along with eating cookie dough comes with binging anime, which comes with not doing a lot of work, which means I just set myself back like so much time. So that realization also has come to me. And so with that, I'm trying to get back into building the tiny habits that will, like I said, help me pursue my dream identity, the person that I want to become. And then a really big L that I took was, this was yesterday or the day before? I think this was yesterday. A little backstory on the situation. A couple months back, we had a guest speaker come in for the entrepreneurship club or group on campus. It was a super big VC guy. He's a partner at one of the biggest VC firms, and he's just sharing like his story, what he's been doing, what he's been up to. At the very end, I go up to him and I'm like, hey, I'm going to SF in a couple months. Would you mind if we like connected? Maybe you could come by. And he agreed. He was like, oh yeah, for sure, you should come. So we booked this out like literally months in advance. It was probably like October or November at this point. We put a time in the calendar or a date in the calendar for March. So this was like booked out months in advance. Come the day of the event or of the thing where I'm supposed to bring a group of students, like 5 other kids, they all agreed to come. Come the day of an event, and then we're supposed to go there right after class. So we finish up class. I'm like, hey guys, it's time to bounce. Are y'all ready to go? And they're like, I'm not really sure. Maybe not today. And then when they were bailing out, I was like, oh man, I'll bail out too. Might as well. Like, we can just take it over Zoom. No big deal. And then I emailed the guy. I was like, hey, some of the guys, I made up like this random excuse, but I just asked if we can do a Zoom meeting instead of meeting in person. Because here was my thinking. Like, it's not a big deal. We can just take it over Zoom. A couple weeks earlier, I did basically the exact same thing where it was supposed to be an in-person meeting, but it was like an hour and a half away. So I was like, okay, we'll just take it over Zoom. And he was fine. He was chill with it. So my thinking was like, I'll just apply the same thing over here. No big deal. Shoot him the email and then he shoots me back. That's disappointing because I got food and I skipped a board meeting dinner to make it to this. And when I read those words, bro, my heart sank. Oh my goodness. I was like, freak. Like, that was a huge mistake. And yeah, that was a huge L that I took. My immediate reaction was fail forward. Like, that is literally the first words out of my mouth was like, and then after that I was like, fail forward. Because there's nothing more I can do. All I can do is learn from that failure, that lesson. And the big thing that I did learn is that I'm going to coordinate these types of things way more in advance and be super clear on like who's coming, like a week in advance, get everyone locked in, how are we going to get there? But more importantly, just not flake on people. Like, that is not the type of reputation I want to have. And as of right now, that's who he knows me as. This kid who put this time in his calendar and then completely flaked on him day of. Like, not even day of. This was literally an hour before the thing. And my entire thing was like, oh yeah, that's fine. Like, without really thinking it through. And so that's the big thing I learned. And yeah, all the other students that were supposed to come, they were like dogging on me. It wasn't their fault, but they were dogging on me like, why would you could have just gone. And I was like, nah, it wasn't worth it. But yeah, now I know. And I really want to make it up to him. I was still trying to think through. I think I'm probably going to send him like a letter and maybe like a gift or something. I don't know. I got to make it up to him somehow because after that, like, no need to follow up anytime soon. Yeah, that was just broken a bridge right there for what could have been. But anyways, lesson learned. We'll see how that relationship pans out. Anyways, on to the weekly roundup, random finds that I had throughout the week. Could be a question, a book, a quote, anything like that. Anything that stuck with me. For the first thing, which is probably different than other ones that I've had, is that I spoke with an author, and he's the author of one of my favorite books ever. There's this book called Tiny Habits. I've talked about this a ton in the past, but the big takeaway from Tiny Habits is what I call the behavior map. And the behavior map just means that we perform actions when 3 things align. We have motivation to do the thing, we are able to do the thing, and there's a prompt telling us to do the thing. The easiest example is like, if I'm playing video games upstairs and I'm hungry, so I want to have this motivation to go eat, and I have the ability to go eat, all I have to do is go downstairs, and my mom, she made this whole dinner. The only thing I need is a prompt, and as soon as my mom's like, hey, it's time to come down, then that's when I go and eat dinner. But if you look at all of the actions, and I've seen this firsthand, when I look at all of the actions that I've ever done, these 3 things always align, always intersect. And the even bigger takeaway from the book is that to enforce habits, it's all about bringing the ability to do something super low so that when motivation fades away, we can still do the action, we can still do the behavior. I implemented this firsthand by working out. When I was going through this really rough patch, I think when I first came into college, instead of working out, like going through this whole like 2-hour workout that I used to do, or this 2-hour routine, instead I was like, all I need to do is go inside, do one exercise, and then I can leave. And that's what I did. There were days where I went inside, I did like 1 set of squats and then I left. Or I went inside and I did 1 set of like the leg curls on the machine and then I left. But through that like habit and doing it over and over again, I built in the tiny habit, and like to this point, it's just become part of my life. Like, just go in and put in the work. And so I reached out to him, like, I don't want to say a week or two back, and he responded, and I got an interview with him. So the thing that you're about to listen to is my quick interview with him. It was supposed to be for a different podcast, the podcast that I'm making for the firm at Soma, but he only had 15 minutes, and so I don't think it would be worth it for that podcast. So I'll just use it for this podcast. So here it is. Cool, I'll give you the rundown. Thanks so much for coming on. I think the biggest thing that I mentioned in the email that I think probably caught your attention is the fact that I'm Pacific Islander, being Polynesian, and then your time in Hawaii. I think that was the big
Yeah,
kind of
great.
connection there.
Good. Well, thanks for reminding me about that. That's great.
Awesome, cool, yeah. And then the thing that I'm working on, I'm a junior at Northwestern, and super involved in this whole startup ecosystem and stuff. And it was actually your book, Tiny Habits, that really it really set me kind of on the right track, so to say. It was the book that got me
Good.
into reading. It was the book that got me into working out and all these different things. And so I'd love to, I think in this interview, just dive in a bit deeper into just a brief overview of the Tiny Habits method and behavior design in general, but more specifically, how that applies to startups and the venture capital world.
Okay, great. Well, let's ask me questions and ask me questions that are not in the book. So if it's in the book, I'll just say it's in the book, but 'cause I want to use this time really efficiently.
I agree. Awesome. I think something that's not in the book is your time that you spent at Venture Nova and kind of how that
Yeah.
VC experience shaped your career.
Let's see. I was working for Casio, the Japanese company at the time, and they wanted to kind of be a player in Silicon Valley. So I started Venture Nova for them. Brought in $8 million just from Casio. That'd be the only people involved. And we got it all put together. It took about a year. It was fun, but it was a ton of work. Made a couple investments, and then the downturn hit. And Japan, the Casio dealer came to us and said, "Oh, we want our money back. We've seen this before in the Japanese economy. We want, our $7.2 million back," or whatever it was. And at first, it was funny. It's like, well, no, we're not going to give the money back. That's what I was telling my team. It's like, they gave it to us. And the Japanese dealer came and said, "Yes, you are." And they were right. So we gave the money back. And what I learned, though, was I didn't like being an investor in companies. Two reasons. One, when people would come and pitch us, well, it was because of this. When people would come and pitch an idea, either it was like, this is a big waste of time, and how do I tell them? And then on the other end of the spectrum, it's like, this is super cool, I want to get involved, which you can't do. You can write a check, but you can't get involved. So I just don't think it wasn't really a great fit for me. I mean, heading things up and putting something together like that was great, and I learned a ton. But I did learn that I didn't want to be a venture investor of that kind. So, so I really don't make a big deal of Venture Nova because it was a year plus, and it's not like I'm in the same leagues as people on Sand Hill Road or anything. So,
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's that. Yeah, that's how.
And then from that, it looked like you really dove deep into this whole research world. And can you tell me more about diving deep into the research world, and then from that, using your research as this kind of catapult into building a whole new lab, a whole new part of Stanford?
Good question. Well, that was happening at the same time as Venture Nova and my work with Casio. So I didn't stop doing the research. I started doing research about 1993, 94, 95. And after I got my doctorate, I kept a foot in the door at Stanford and started a lab. I didn't realize that's what was happening, but the students wanted to work with me, and little by little, we started calling it a lab. I'd date that about 1998, 1999. But also, we were looking for collaborators, and Casio made a bunch of devices, and I was really into the potential of devices to get us to do healthy behaviors. I went to Casio and I said, "Hey, let's partner with my lab, my Stanford lab. And they said, no, we want to hire you. And I said, no, you can't hire me. And they said, well, we're going to try. And I said, well, and I came up with like an outlandish, this is what you're going to pay me. And this is what's going to happen. And I'm only going to give you 50% of the time. And they came back and said, yes. And I was like, well, okay. So I split my time between Casio and my Stanford research, which was great, actually. We learned a lot. I was able to hire a whole bunch of people, saw a lot of interesting things come through, including Tony Fadell came through with his innovations, and we liked him, and we wanted Japan, Casio Japan, to go with it. It was an MP3 player, and Casio wouldn't do it because they were very afraid of the legal issues. The MP3 legal issues were not resolved. And then Tony went and shopped it to Apple, and Steve Jobs saw the potential. So we actually saw that before Apple did. And we actually developed an ecosystem of apps that would work with Casio's handhelds, much like the App Store 5 years before Apple was doing that, I think. So we did some good innovation, but what I learned was it's very hard to understand from Silicon Valley, very hard to understand Japanese culture and Japanese way of doing business. And what seemed obvious for us to move forward seemed very risky to them. And so so it was frustrating in those ways. So I was doing both at the same time, the research at Stanford and also innovation in this world of devices and connected devices.
Yeah, exactly. And then from there, you started teaching these classes, and from podcast interviews that I've heard in the past, you actually worked with so some of the early founders of Instagram, and in your class, they built like the
Yeah,
early prototype of what Instagram eventually became to be.
yeah,
And what I'm
sort of.
curious about that specifically is
Yeah,
how they're able to implement it, but also kind of exploring the ethical side of the ethics of implementing this type of behavior design into
yeah,
products like Instagram.
yeah. So I started teaching in 1998, and I taught a few times a year. So it's not like I started teaching.
Mhm.
After my doctorate, I started teaching my stuff, and a little bit different angle every year. And when in 2006, I wanted to teach about mobile devices and the web. This was before the iPhone and before they could do very much. And they didn't really prototype it. I had a template that I developed in industry of how you would conceptualize a product or service in like 10 slides, and they just had to fill in the blanks. So I developed this template I'd been using um, in various ways. And the last assignment of that class was one of these days, these things we call phones that can take some pictures. One of these days, you'll be able to share pictures through these phones, which you couldn't do very well at the time. And so I split the class into teams of three and said, come up with a positive use of this future technology. And so Mike Krieger was on a team, ironically, with Tristan Harris. And still nobody, I shared that before, but Tristan Harris is the person that's gone on and done humane technology group. And then Mike, they were both on the same team, but they came up with a concept called Share the Sunshine. They didn't prototype it. They just conceptualized and said, this is what would happen. This is how it would work. People would share positive moments with each other, sunrises, sunsets, and so on. And this is what they would do to mobile. And it was a short project. It's like 2 weeks. And I went back and looked, and they got a good grade on it. I think even 18 out of 20, which for me was a very good grade. And that was kind of that until later, I guess. Mike Krieger, after a few twists and turns doing a startup, went to this concept and started putting together for real, like a photo sharing solution, which came at a time when there's a ton of, not a ton, 8 probably serious competitors. And I think the thing he did very well was keep it really simple, really, really simple. He didn't try to match what Flickr was doing or some of the other photo sharing services. He just kept it really, really simple. And I think that was part of the key. And then the filters. I think he had 12 filters, and that's all you could do. So that's the story of how that happened. So it wasn't a prototype in the class. It was come up with a concept. And on the ethical side, in that class and all of my classes, I talk about the ethics of designing products that will influence behavior. And that class is no exception. In fact, it was during that class in 2006, so this was pre-iPhone. It was during that class that the FTC invited me to give a testimony about the dangers of upcoming technologies, what I foresaw. And so you can still find that testimony and the script of it, and even the little weird video I recorded for them. Mike Krieger helped on that. Tristan Harris did not help on that. So irony again. So Mike Krieger was one of the students that helped put together the thoughts and the video and whatever, where Tristan Harris, who later became quite famous for talking about the dangers of technology, he did not help on that project. So I think that was a pretty clear signal to students that there are dark sides to this, and to share those dark sides, so we need to get policymakers to move on it. That was 2006. They didn't move on it for at least 10 years. They didn't care. Nobody followed up with me. I got zero follow-up on that for a long time, until I started getting blamed for all that crap. And then still policymakers didn't follow up, but people just started pointing to me and my lab members as the problem. Or it's like, no, we were the people that warned you. We weren't the problem. We were the people that saw it first and said these dark sides could happen, and they did, actually. Some of them. Actually, all of them we predicted happen. So that's how that works.
Yeah, and it seems like there is this sort of need or responsibilities in some ways for these people who are building these products to think about the long-term impact. And I think one of the things I noticed while reaching out to you, especially, was because of your connection to Hawaii and this aloha spirit, so to say. It was this like very, very generosity like driven spirit. And so I'm curious for you, well, how do you think founders or investors today can bring this aloha spirit to their work?
I actually don't think you do very much, to be honest. I think innovators will, but then when you get down to at least venture capital investing, no, they're there to make money. And there's angel investors like Esther Dyson and the Midyars who are they're affiliated with, they're in Oahu. And there's a handful of angel investors, probably more than that, but a handful that I know that are really want to invest to make the world a better place. But I think when you get into certainly B rounds and C rounds, they don't care. Are we going to make, they don't care very much. I'll say it that way. It's really about, they need to make money for their partners. Got it. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, but that's not
no worries, no worries.
Yeah,
exactly.
Unfortunately.
How do you think that goes for the founders? Or if that's possible?
I think the founders, it's mixed. As you see, it's a big spectrum. I think a lot of founders want to do good in the world, and to stick to that, I think, can be hard, because once you accept money from an investor, the game changes really a lot, radically. So I think I would guess, this is a guess, I would guess certain founders can stick to the guns and say, no, we're going to do this. I think if they're young and they're just like, we're going to just take money from anyone, they don't realize they got into a marriage or a legal relationship with somebody who has different objectives. And I think that can be tough. So, I mean, the advice that is out there, like, don't take money if you don't have to, is really good advice. But I think back in the day when I did a startup, I did a startup that was about connecting people through audio, asynchronous audio. You don't really hear that. You just think, man, we need to get our angel round, we need to get our A round, we got to get ready. And you're just so focused on the pattern that keeps getting broadcast that you don't really, at least we didn't hear the voices of Be careful about taking money. Don't take money if you don't have to. Don't take money from friends and family. We made all those mistakes. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, no, I think in some ways I definitely agree with that part of if you don't have to, don't take the money.
Yeah.
BJ, thank you so much for the 15 minutes. I know we're wrapping up, but super
Well,
happy that I was able to
ask
chat
me
with you.
one more question. How do I help you on what you're working on? So I think I give you sort of a little background and stuff, but what question do you have for me where it helps you move forward with good things in the world?
Mm. I don't think there's like one specific ask for me personally. I honestly think this interview, it was a very selfish way for me to, I don't know, get to talk to, I think Tiny Habits is probably my favorite book ever. And so I think
Oh,
it was like a
thank
very
you.
selfish way for me to talk with, the author of it. So that was really cool. But yeah,
Thank you so
it
much.
was awesome.
Well, thank you so much. Well, and you did ask good questions that I rarely get asked, and they're not in the Tiny
I tried
Habits
to, I
book,
tried to.
but they did inform a lot of how I think about things now and how I innovate now or how I encourage my students. So thank you for reaching out and thank you for the call.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, BJ.
All right.
Okay. You have a good one.
Bye.
At the last part of that interview, I remember asking him the aloha questions, like, "Oh yeah, how can people bring aloha into the workplace?" And then his answer, it caught me by surprise. It was very pessimistic, especially because I don't know, I was expecting some like, oh, grandiose, like happy thing, but he was like very straight up, very truthful, which kind of took me by surprise. But that's how things are, for sure, for sure. Anyways, moving on to the next part, which is the quote. The quote that I found for this episode is something that my professor was talking about. And he said that on his desktop, on his computer, his home office, he has this sticky note. And it's a reminder to him to do the things that are hard to do because not everyone will do them. Actually, in fact, most people will not do them. And the quote is simply, most people won't. And for some reason, when he said that, it stuck so much with me. And I was digging in, trying to find where this quote originated from. Turns out it was from another VC guy. And he posted like a poem almost of this quote, most people won't. And it stuck out to me so much. But here's the poem. Most people want to be fit, most people aren't. Most people want to build a successful business, most people won't. Most people want to be the best versions of themselves, most people aren't. Most people have dreams they want to fulfill, most people won't. Everyone wants to quit something, build something, be something, do something. Most people won't. How many things have we wanted? How many opportunities have we craved? How many broken things have we wanted to fix? And how many of those have we shrunk from, hid from, or excused away? We're not alone. Most people won't. But every once in a while, someone puts themselves out there, makes the leap, faces rejection or failure or worse, and comes out the other side. Better, changed, bolder. Most people won't, which means those that do change everything. And that was like, I don't know, it was a really cool reminder of the fact that it's so true. Most people simply won't. And for the ones that do, it makes us stand out that much more from all of the other people. So I think that was really cool. And the question I had for this episode that kind of ties back to what I was talking about earlier is, what is your mantra? What's your guiding principles, your values? And I think this is probably, I don't know, it's probably something good to think about, especially if you haven't thought about it ever or in a long time. Because as I was giving it a lot of thought for what are my mantras, like my guiding principles, it really solidified a lot of things that I had in my head that'll probably be helpful as I move forward. And then the podcast that I found was an episode from a guy who runs the How to Take Over the World podcast. And it's really cool because he does deep dives into historical figures, like literally everyone. Could be business people, media people, emperors, conquerors, religious leaders, like all these different people. He's done some on Alexander the Great. He did one on Jesus. He did one on like all these cool people. And he compiled a list of lessons from 10 lessons from 100 of the episodes that he's put out. And I think probably the most surprising lesson that he's had is that a lot of them were fast eaters. And the reason they were fast eaters was because they were so focused on the mission of what they were trying to do, that they simply didn't want to like waste time on things that weren't contributing to the mission, which was eating. Like they want to knock it out as fast as possible. So I thought that was really cool. And then the video that I found was from the Jimmy Fallon interview where he interviewed Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley. This past weekend was the Super Bowl, and the Eagles won. For some backstory, they beat the Chiefs, but I think it was 2 years ago or last year, they had the same teams matched up. There were the Eagles versus Chiefs, but the Eagles lost that one. And Jalen Hurts, the quarterback of the Eagles, ever since that game, he had this picture on his phone, and it was a picture of him walking off the field of when he lost that game. And it was, I don't know, for him, he doesn't describe it as like this huge source of motivation, but it was definitely like this small reminder of the way he felt and how he wants to get after it. So you can imagine he gets his second chance at the Super Bowl against the same team. And spoiler alert, the Eagles smacked the Chiefs. But I think what really surprised me the most about this whole thing was that at this interview, he finishes up the game. Now he's at the interview. And Jimmy asked, like, okay, well, what's your new wallpaper? Because I would assume it's something new, like the trophy or him walking off and after the win. But he says he hasn't changed it. And I thought that was really cool because it was like, he's in it for the long game. It's not just this one and done type thing where, okay, now he's won, so he can change it, so everything's good now. It was no, like, yes, he's won this Super Bowl, now it's on to the next. And I thought that was really cool, like embodying his mentality of things that he wants to go after. Now on to the philosophizing section. I usually do those sections in reverse, but today I did it a different way. Anyways, onto the philosophizing section. One of my classes, it's like a finance entrepreneurship class, so we really dive deep into venture capital. And one of the biggest things as we were talking about it is the mindset that you have to have as a VC. Because the thing about venture is that 10% of the portfolio deliver 90% of the returns, which is something they call the power rule. And what's really important about this mindset is that it influences how they make decisions. More specifically, they are looking to maximize wins instead of minimizing losses, which is why they're willing to kind of spray and pray, like throw their money at all these different startups with the hope that one of them will take off. Because even if 99% of all of their investments fail, it's that 1%, that one startup that makes it to IPO and delivers $1 billion outcome that carries the entire fund. And it's honestly very similar to one of my guiding things, like this growth mindset, like this fail forward mindset that I'm all about. So I thought that was really cool. And then the other thing that I realized was this thing called the Pygmalion effect. And to describe what this is, or the way I understand it, basically if you take two classrooms, one classroom, let's say they both have the same students, one classroom, the teacher thinks that their students are dumb, and they're basically like, yeah, they're just straight up dumb. The other one thinks that their students are smart. And so they start teaching and treating their students in a way that reflects how they think about their students. And then the students perform how the teachers treat them. And then it creates a cycle of, okay, students does well. The teacher treats the student as like they're a good student, and then keeps going from there. And it's got me thinking about this idea of vicious versus virtuous cycles. And I come back to this all the time, but it's so true. Like, it's important taking that first jump, that first leap of faith toward building something that you want, even if it's like this irrational type of belief. Like, there's still this value that comes from it, especially if it's the first jump that requires to kickstart that virtuous cycle, which I think is super important. So that was something I was thinking about. And then the other thing, or really three things that I was thinking about on this past Yosemite trip, because we went with a group of like 9 students who went down to Yosemite, 4-hour drive. And these were 3 big takeaways that I had from like the conversations that I had down there. The first one was this idea of opportunity blind spots. To illustrate this, my entire life growing up, I never heard the word private equity. I never heard about consulting or investment banking or venture capital or all these other things. I simply did not know what I didn't know. And those were the big blind spots. And a big part of that was because of the people that I surrounded myself with. Like everyone around me, they were doing like construction jobs or airline jobs. No one was doing any of this investment stuff. And it's kind of this hypothesis or theory that I have. It's probably like published works on this. But I think people who come from lower income backgrounds, the reason they stay low income is probably, or like a big reason of why they stay low income is probably because they simply don't know the opportunities that are out there. Like when I go back to the islands, the vast majority of those people have no idea about anything going on in the investment banking world, in like the finance world. And so it's like they're closed off to the opportunities that are out there. And it's not this lack of talent that they have, but it's more so this lack of knowledge, like these blind spots that they have. So that's kind of like a theory that I've been thinking about. The other thing that I was thinking as we were having all these conversations in Yosemite is that this idea of work-life balance, because coming out here, especially in the startup world, and to this day, I honestly hold true to the fact that I think work-life balance is overhyped. Like people are like, oh, you gotta have work-life balance, like 9 to 5, and then after you clock in, clock out. I honestly disagree with that type of thinking, especially as I'm in my 20s. I'm hungry, willing to put in the work and learn. But I've been thinking about it more, and I think there's something to be said about this 80-20 split of work-life balance. To illustrate this, imagine you have like this 100% time of what you can pour into family or into life. I think 20% of that time is actually like the most impactful, and the 20% that really, really matters. And so in my thinking, I think in my personal time, I would rather allocate like the 80% to putting it into the work and then leaving that 20% for my life, the things that really matter, like to making sure I'm on top of my health, making sure I'm on top of, I don't know, like family obligations, things like that. Because especially as I'm in my 20s, I'm willing to go harder. I'm willing to put in more work because I have less responsibility. Or at least that's my thinking now. This might change in the future for sure, but that's how I'm thinking through it now. And then the last kind of big realization I had over the trip was this idea of reverse FOMO. I think on this trip, I was thinking about how many people would have huge FOMO if they weren't able to make it out here. But I was thinking about that more and how I would have been fine if I stayed home and it was just working. Like, it wasn't necessarily reverse FOMO where like I was itching to go back home and I wish I didn't go on that trip. But it was more so like the absence of FOMO. Like if I didn't go on that trip, I would have been okay. And I think that was the first time where I really had that realization of absence of FOMO. Well, whatever you want to call it. But finally, and hopefully this is fully recorded, but update on my life and the four most important areas of my life: my God, myself, my people, and my work, in that order. Update on my God. I'm really trying to fit in a good Bible reading habit. I think what I've been trying to do for a long, long time is try to read a verse right before I go to sleep, which hasn't really been working out because I like reading philosophy stuff or like other stuff that interests me outside of the Bible. So I think like maybe I'll try to fit it into my morning routine or fit it into like after lunch or something. I don't know. But I'll try to fit in some time for that, especially because I'm trying to read it in Tongan. And so it takes kind of a lot of brain power. And I think when I go to sleep, I don't want to use a lot of brain power. I just want to like read philosophy stuff, which doesn't use as much brain power as like trying to translate into another language. Update on myself. Been pretty good, honestly, because lately I've been hitting the gym way harder and way more intensely than I have but in the past, which is kind of nice. It's been nice to like, I don't know, get back into the swing of things. So that's been cool. Update on my people. I already talked about the Yosemite trip that I had, which is really cool. Great combos. And then this weekend, my fam is pulling up, so that'll be awesome. Get to spend some time with the fam. And then update on my work. Honestly, the biggest thing would be the projects that I'm working on to become technical. That's probably the biggest thing. And then outside of that, yeah, just keep on grinding, keep on putting in the work in and seeing where things go. But hopefully this was fully recorded. I'll catch you in the next one. I record these episodes completely free to share success with everyone. So the only thing I ask is that if you learned anything or found something interesting in this episode, just leave a review and share it with a friend. Only takes 5 seconds and it would mean the world. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next episode. Tatok, see you.